Sergeants, can you notify the authors that we're going to wait for until 5 after, and then we are leaving? And having heard that, the Assemblyman, I hope, heard that, because you know what? We're the upper house, and we can. All right. You have, which bill is this? You've got file item 2, AB 184.
That's
welcome.
Correct. Madam Chair, thank you. Assembly Bill 184 is a bill that allows school districts to recover special education funding that they received and spent in the last fiscal year. Specifically, AB 184 extends the sunset for the Special Disabilities Adjustment, and by extension, authorizes the California Department of Education to restore the Special Disabilities Adjustment funding for 2009-10. This is funding that school districts received and spent in the last fiscal year. These funds have already been appropriated in the 9-10 budget, so there's no additional cost to the state. In addition, I have authors' amendments that I'm circulating right now that would include the budget.
Excuse me, we're going to stop for a moment. Let's call the roll to establish the quorum.
Romero?
Here.
Romero here. Huff?
Here.
Huff here. Alquist? Emerson?
Here.
Emerson here. Hancock? Blue? Here. Blue here. Price? Smidian?
Here.
Smidian here. Wyland? You have a quorum.
Okay, we do have a quorum. Please proceed.
Okay, the amendments that you're getting include the Budget Conference Committee's agreement on special disabilities adjustment funding. That includes not only the 9-10 funding, but also includes 10-11 funding, along with the repeal of the funding formula effective January 1st, 2012. It's my understanding that including the entire Conference Committee agreement in the exact language that it is implementing is acceptable to this committee. And we will amend it. We'll take the amendments actually in appropriations.
Okay, so we want to establish that the amendments, you've accepted the amendments, and these will be taken in the next committee.
Right. We're distributing so your members can see them, but they'll be taken in the next committee.
Okay.
Reason for the measure and the urgency is that last month the California Department of Education, claiming to have no statutory authority, started taking back from school districts some special education funding. This left districts scrambling in an effort to cope with this unexpected cash shortage and to do budget revisions after they had already closed their books for 2009-10. Until a budget's finalized without this bill, the funding uncertainty would almost certainly obligate some districts to lay off employees for a short period of time in order to meet their county office solvency requirements. We shouldn't let that happen. This bill will correct what really is an inadvertent oversight, and I urge your aye vote. With me today, we have San Diego Unified, one of the sponsors of the bill, along with several other. There are many, many districts throughout the state that are impacted. And we have Monica Henestroza here from San Diego Unified to testify.
Okay, 2 witnesses in support.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chairman, and members. Monica Henestroza on behalf of San Diego Unified. I'm here today in support of this measure because it's something that we need urgently. Obviously, we greatly appreciate the work that the Senate as well as the Assembly has done to broker a compromise on how the special disabilities funding will work for 9-10, for 10-11, and for future years. And we think our understanding is based on the unanimous 10-0 vote that this is a compromise that makes sense and is reasonable and fair to all. However, there's an immediate problem at hand that Mr. Block mentioned, and that is that school districts are hanging on to fiscal solvency and their reasonable safe cash flow level by just a hair. And without the ability to guarantee to our county offices that we will indeed receive these funds, that indeed our revenue projections are reasonable, we will face 2 problems. One, on the cash shortage level, we won't be able to move forward with facilities projects during the summer that we had already planned to do, such as air conditioning repairs in elementary schools and other things, because we'll be needing to use our cash to meet payroll. And on the second instance, we may also actually need to go back and revise our budgets. That would require laying off employees, even though we know the cash is coming soon. So I thank you for considering this measure and thank the Assembly member for taking up this urgent cost. Thank you.
Okay, second witness.
Madam Chair, members, I'm Dennis Myers with the California Association of School Business Officials. As Ms. Henestroza was mentioning, this issue is important to fast track before the budget just because of right now we're in budget approval season, and county offices of education, as they're looking at budgets of LEAs, are looking for assurances that the money that they put in their budgets are real and going to actually be there in the future. That's why it's important to address not only 910, but 1011 as well. And then to have the sunset in there makes sure that everybody's feet are to the fire to talk about distribution in the future. So we ask for your support. This is urgent to get moving right away. Thank you.
Okay, others to simply identify your support.
Madam Chair, members, Jeff Frost, representing the school districts of Glendale, Pasadena, Rowland, Whittier Elementary and High School districts, and the Riverside Unified School Districts in support.
Madam Chair and members, Rand Martin on behalf of the California Charter Schools Association, in very strong support of this bill. Thank you.
Madam Chair and members, my name is Nancy Lacoste, and I'm representing the County Superintendents Association, and we are in strong support.
Madam Chair, members, Edgar Sasueta on behalf of Los Angeles Unified School District, in strong support.
Madam Chair and members, Deborah Harmon on behalf of Fresno Unified School District, in strong support.
Terry Anderson on behalf of the Coalition for Adequate Funding for Special Education, in support.
Madam Chair and members, Lisa Salisbury on behalf of the San Diego County Office of Education, in strong support. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeff Freitas with the California Federation of Teachers, in support of this bill.
Any others in support? Witnesses in opposition? Senator Weiland.
Just one brief note, because special education is such a huge cost factor for every district. I really wish the legislature and all the stakeholders, which would include the federation, the various associations, would put unified pressure on or off, unified pressure on the feds to fund special ed. Most of those requirements come from the feds. The court decisions that have made it ever more expensive are never changed through federal law. And I just wish we could do that. So the feds are willing to spend money right now, and it would solve a lot of problems.
Okay, I'd like to concur with Senator Weiland. Absolutely agree with your comments. And you have a motion on the bill. Quick close.
Just urge your aye vote. Thank you.
Call the roll.
Romero?
Aye.
Romero, aye. Huff?
Aye.
Huff, aye. Alquist? Emerson?
Aye.
Emerson, aye. Hancock? Aye. Aye. Lou? Aye. Lou, aye. Price? Semidian?
Aye.
Semidian, aye. Weiland?
Aye.
Weiland, aye. 7.
Okay, 7 votes. That bill is out.
Thank
Do
you.
you want to leave it open for all those? No? Okay. Cool.
I already said out. Yeah. So it's out. Remind me next time. Okay. Okay, Assemblyman Norby, file item 1. Welcome. You have file item 1, AB 70.
I do.
It's an urgency measure.
It is very urgent.
All right.
Madam Chair. AB 70 addresses issues that have been raised by a freshman orientation program at the University of California, in which all approximately 5,500 freshmen were sent a request that they swab themselves and submit this DNA sample to the university, mailing it in as part of an educational exercise. A lot of concerns were raised about this, and it's received a lot of attention in the papers as well. If I'm an incoming freshman to a large state university and I've worked my whole life getting good grades to qualify, and suddenly I'm getting a request to submit a DNA sample, which can be used in a lot of different ways, both positive and negative, what are the implications of this? And should a state university, our flagship university in Berkeley, be pursuing such a program? We held a hearing yesterday with myself and Chair Marty Block of the Assembly Higher Education Committee, inviting representatives from the university in to discuss this issue. They did a fairly good job, but a lot of new issues were raised as well. What about the consent form? A lot of these kids are under 18 years old and are not legal adults. What happens to the information? Is it destroyed? Is it kept? Are there health advisories being provided here? They were looking for 3 different markers having to do with the ability to process folic acid, alcohol, and dairy products. So a lot of questions were raised, and this bill simply clarifies what the consent form will say, because the consent form, in our judgment, was not adequate. It also clarifies exactly for what information this is going to be used. How is this DNA going to be used? And it specifies under law that it must also be destroyed. It can't be kept in a data bank. It can't be used for research purposes. Now, as it turns out of 5,500 students who requested this, less than 400 actually submitted their DNA. That's a return rate of less than 10%. So the students either didn't want to do it, or they didn't read the information, or when they got this fancy flyer that said, send your jeans to Cal, that maybe they thought it was an ad for clothing or something. Jeans was spelled G-E-N-E, but you're never sure sometimes exactly what something like that might mean. So it looks like the entire program is not really going the direction where the university wanted, and based on the lack of response from the students themselves, may not in the future. But I think it's important that we clarify this in law, and that we protect the taxpayers from future lawsuits that might result in a program such as this being improperly administered. So I ask for your aye vote for AB 70.
Assemblyman Norby, I know there had been communication with the committee staff, the committee chair, with respect to concerns, and I think rightful concerns that you have raised in this bill. We had suggested some amendments.
Right.
Are you prepared to accept?
I believe they've all been accepted, Madam Chair.
The next committee.
And I'm happy to improve this bill as it goes along in front of this committee as well.
Okay, and we've distributed these proposed amendments to the committee members, and again, these amendments would be committed to now but adopted in the next committee. Okay, so I just want to make sure that now, to make sure that everybody's working off the proposed amendments, which I think go to the concerns that you have rightfully raised, alleviate some of the, perhaps the unnecessary tying down that we don't.
There were some reporting requirements earlier. We're not expecting them to report to us on a quarterly basis, but simply to help guide them as to how to properly do this if they're doing this in the future. The purpose isn't to hamstring. Maybe there is legitimate educational purpose here. Maybe they've learned from this attempt not to do it again because it really wasn't that popular among the students, but we need to provide some leadership in this brave new world.
And Assemblyman Norby, I actually initially I thought I would go ahead and vote for the penalties coming out of the UC budget itself, but my staff persuaded me not to go that far. So, but I think message sent. Let's hear from witnesses in support.
Yes, Lenny Goldberg, Privacy Rights Clearinghouse. The committee yesterday heard from some experts on genetic testing. We have had a number of discussions in the last couple of years about the information contained in DNA testing, the licensing of laboratories, and the actions of the federal government with regard to genetic information. And there are these issues seem to be fraught with privacy concerns, with the maintaining of these records of personal identification. And my client, the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse, was, along with Mr. Norby, very concerned about this UC Berkeley proposal. We think this bill is a very good step forward, particularly in the area of informed consent. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and informed consent is very important in this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members. Valerie Small-Navarro with the American Civil Liberties Union. I think what's important, what was important from the meeting yesterday was to note that it's vital for the University of California to take a second look, take a step back, and review its program in public with the legislature, looking at all the factors, looking at what was presented to the students, what were the choices, what was the information given. So I think the overarching message that came from that hearing yesterday was very important. On this bill that's in front of you today, I think the bill has been significantly changed. We were not in support of the bill as it was in print. Now I think what we're looking at is an opportunity for real informed consent. The university has told us that the genes that they were looking at were not unimportant or insignificant genes. I think the discussion yesterday revealed that one of the genes shows an increased probability of the cancer of the esophagus. I think that's an important medical issue. I think another thing that was raised was about alcoholism, that one of the other genes or variants also gave some information about alcoholism in families. So I think this is important information. Students getting this information need to have some help in interpreting and understanding this information. It's not enough to expect them to read it online or watch a video or call the dean of the College of Letters and Sciences. I think that's inappropriate when people are getting important medical information as well as something that may not be as important. Also, I just wanted to quickly turn, we've had just recently, the General Accounting Office issued a fairly long report on problems with the direct-to-consumer genetic testing industry. Now, I understand this is the university. It's not part of this industry, although there were references to this industry in the materials suggesting that if people didn't want to go through this process at Cal, they could contact specific companies, 23andMe and others that were specifically criticized in this GAO report. So I suggest this is a very modest proposal you have in front of you. I know the UCs here and other people will come and tell you, the sky is falling. The sky is not falling. These informed consent procedures are things that all of us would want before we gave our DNA to anyone. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. Any other witnesses in support for identification purposes? Questions from the committee at this point, or we can wait for the opposition? Okay. And members, let me also indicate Senator Simitian had requested that the university provide to the members of the committee what was sent to these prospective incoming students. You've all received this packet, Bring Your Genes to Cal, some information, et cetera, the little swabbing, et cetera. So I'm not urging you that you swab yourself and mail it into the UC, but this is what the students got. Witnesses in opposition. Please step forward, 2 witnesses, and we'll hear from you. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Steve Juarez from the University of California. This is an important issue, I think one of the more important issues that you're going to be considering this year with regard to higher education, and I hope in the course of my testimony I can explain why. Last week we did send you a letter indicating our opposition to AB 70 as it was amended on August 2nd due to the specific provisions of the bill that sought to penalize the university for engaging in legitimate research and teaching that involves DNA testing. But more importantly, because the measure threatens to curtail this activity and the significant advancements that have resulted from these academic pursuits. We have received the author's amendments as of last night, and although we have not had a chance to fully assess the impact of these amendments, I can tell you that at first blush, we believe the amendments are equally problematic. In particular, the requirement that state-informed consent and certified lab procedures be employed where a DNA sample of a student might be used. First, it is important that the committee understand that in virtually every instance of this type of research, faculty persons using DNA samples already follow federal informed consent procedures because these procedures are incorporated into our institutional research policies. By subjecting such activities to state-informed consent procedures, the amendment would appear to unnecessarily add administrative burden and paperwork with no substantive increase in protection. Further, the amendments appear to suggest that the State Business and Professions Code 1288 would govern informed consent procedures when, in fact, it would require the use of state-approved labs for these tests. Academic personnel who use DNA samples for non-clinical and non-medical purposes receive a vital exception in state law because much of the cutting-edge research that saves lives and produces new discoveries does not require a certified lab or certified lab director to conduct such analysis. Were this provision to stay in place, the cost of performing such education and research activities would be prohibitive, resulting in significantly increased cost to carry this activity out, or worse, preventing it from happening at all. The state and the health and welfare of people worldwide who might otherwise benefit from the advancements made possible by DNA research would be the true losers if this provision is adopted. As was made apparent by yesterday's Assembly Higher Education hearing on the Berkeley program, Bring Your Genes to Cal, issues surrounding DNA testing are invariably complex, even when they are done for laudatory academic purposes. We believe that attempting to apply hastily drafted amendments does a disservice to the current review process that UC and other educational research institutions, both public and private, undertake to review and direct academic and research efforts, namely the Institutional Review Board process that carefully weighs the legal, ethical, and scientific issues that such research may raise. We would implore the committee to carefully consider what amendments might be approved and their ultimate impact on future scientific advancements that come from reasonable and legitimate use of DNA testing. Joining me today to help answer any questions that you may have about the specific impact that the amendments would have on genetic education and research is Professor Jasper Rine, a genetics professor from UC Berkeley who's directing the DNA testing aspect of the Bring Your Genes to Cal program, and he can also answer questions about that specific program. I'll turn it over to CSU at this point.
Okay, let's go over to the CSU representative, and then I know that we have questions from committee members. Can you please put your mic on?
My name is Amy Costner. I'm here representing the California State University, and unfortunately we must oppose Assembly Bill 70 by Assemblyman Norby in the current version before the committee. We understand that there have been amendments offered, and we have not had a chance to completely review those amendments. However, in our very cursory review, we do feel that some of the concerns raised in our initial opposition letter still stand. One of the issues that we raise in our letter is the unsolicited request provision of the bill to enroll our prospective students, and we believe that particular provision could unintentionally harm some well-recognized classroom exercises. The example we cite is in our introductory life science courses. Students are often asked to swab their cheek, and then they would actually do a blood test to determine their blood type, and that is a nationally recognized classroom model. Under the provisions of the bill and possibly under the amendments, such exercises would be prohibited. We also are concerned, as the University of California, with the administrative cost for administering the provisions of AB 70.
Sure. Go ahead, Senator Simitian.
So if I was taking the class and I said I don't want to do that, does that mean I flunked the class?
No. Right now, that isn't considered, such an exercise is considered exempt under kind of classroom or educational setting provisions. So we don't go through the Institutional Review Board process that is contemplated in this measure. I can tell you that...
But it is voluntary.
It is absolutely voluntary. Again, we're also concerned with some of the administrative costs that would be part of the CSU's expenses given the provisions of this bill and possibly under some of the amendments as well. 22 of our 23 campuses utilize the Institutional Review Board process for each of the campuses that participate in research. Among the guidelines that researchers are subject to, there are specific provisions for research that involve human subjects. The legislation creates additional administrative requirements for the university for the documentation of DNA as contemplated in the proposed amendments. AB 70 creates additional costly administrative burdens, and frankly, in these difficult budget times, such costs and resources are incredibly valuable. CSU faculty and their students conduct human subject research, follow these federal guidelines, including review by their campus institutional review board. The issues involved here are quite complex. The CSU understands the concerns of the legislature. However, we hope that there are not unintended consequences in the legislation, consequences that would impact a genuine classroom experience and learning, increased administrative costs, or confusion over the appropriate compliance of research involving human subjects. We respectfully ask for your no vote on this measure. Thank you.
Any other witnesses in opposition? Okay, what I'm going to do then is open it up to questions from the committee, and Professor Rine, we appreciate you being here, and I think we can go ahead and hear from you if there's a specific question. Let me just ask a couple of opening questions, and then I'm going to turn it over. And I think Senator Simitian, I think this is an area where you've spent a great deal of your legislative career on privacy issues. I know you have a number of concerns, and without objection from the members, I'm going to go to Senator Simitian next, and then we can go ahead and raise it. But let me just say that when I first learned about this through the media, I was stunned. I was amazed what the university was doing, and I questioned it. Remember, I fly, most of us do fly on a weekly basis. We go through these screens, and there's been quite a bit of debate about looking at privacy issues and walking through screen. And that's just walking through an airport. That's not saying swab and give. I think there are legitimate privacy concerns about how this information is used. Remember that many of our students coming into the university are young students, get a packet of information, a sign on the dotted line, turn it back. Questions of, again, too, am I admitted, am I not? Once you submit DNA, how long is it kept? And for what purpose? And at what point in the future is it connected to other databases? There were concerns about cost. I think one question I want to ask is how much did this cost to send this out? I read through this consent form, and I would like clarification because I've heard two different answers. Is this an educational activity, or is this a research activity? Because I've heard from the UC two different responses, and I am confused on that response. So I'd like a clear answer. And then on this consent form that was sent out, does this meet federal guidelines? This consent form that was sent to students. So those are the questions that I have, and I'd like to, though, just first get a clear answer from, is this considered an educational or a medical research activity? Which one is it?
The gene testing part of this program, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to respond to these questions. The gene testing part of this program is purely an educational exercise, purely. The research component of it is a research in how does one do education on gene testing in a very broad-based public university to entering freshmen. We're trying to learn what works and what doesn't work. So the education part is research, but the gene testing part is pure education. And I appreciate that has confused many people.
Let me go. Senator Simitian, would you care to ask your questions at this time?
Well, I'm guessing that on the what works and what doesn't, you have some answers already in terms of how the process is working. First, I just have an observation. No response is required, and then I've got some questions. You know, these conversations with the university are frustrating. We have too many of them. I've looked through the material. I think it sounds like a fascinating project, quite frankly. I think there's a lot of educational merit there based on what little I know about the field, and I want to underscore little I know about the field. That being said, I think at best, the project has been a little tone deaf, little artless in the way it has communicated what it's trying to do, and I think you're reaping the consequences of that right now. So that's sort of where I think we find ourselves, and is that I'm frustrated that here we are, a few weeks before we're supposed to wrap up the end of our 2-year session, and with no budget in sight, having this debate in real time with suggested amendments that are still not in legislative council form. And that's not a criticism of anybody. That's where we are. That's what the nature of the process is. Let me ask a couple of questions going back. Put aside what the legislation might propose. Was there ever any date certain by which all of the materials and all of the data would be destroyed?
That's a great question. So with respect to the materials will absolutely be completely destroyed as soon as we can complete the gene testing. And we expect to be able to complete the gene testing by September 12th at the very latest, with respect, so that we can present the aggregate data in a public lecture on the 13th, and then give the students access to their data after a week-long program emphasizing the many different educational aspects of issues related to gene testing.
Okay.
With respect to the data, very useful concerns were raised yesterday. We agreed that we were ambiguous about when the data would be terminated, and we hereby agree that we believe the individual genetic data should be destroyed as quickly as possible as soon as the students have a chance to get access to it. I would estimate that to be in the weeks to months time frame, and I hereby commit to doing that at the earliest possible date.
Okay, well, the problem with aggregate data, of course, is that it's comprised of individual data. So what about the aggregate data?
May I explain the aggregate data to you? For each gene, there are 3 possible outcomes, AA, AB, or BB. So the aggregate data will consist of at this point, the sum of 550 rows. We have 550 samples as of today. 150 came in this morning, and we expect more through the week. How many of the 550 are AA, AB, and BB? That's the nature of the aggregate data, and we'll have that for 3 genes.
Except we will have, as aggregate data, the list of all of the participants with their individual data attached to their anonymous number.
No, that would not be the aggregated data. And the original list of the individual data has only as an identifier the number that is on the barcode in the kit that you saw.
But you will know again, and forgive me if I'm just not picking up on the answer, I apologize. In order to have aggregate data, you have to add together all the individual data.
That's right. That can be done in a spreadsheet.
So if you do that on a spreadsheet, then you can disaggregate the data by going in reverse.
To my knowledge, that would be impossible to do that because the aggregated data is simply the arithmetic sum of all of the different possible data types. And if we destroy the individual data at that point and simply have the aggregate data, it's essentially 3 numbers. Well, excuse me, it's 9 numbers.
So it is the cumulative total of all, but with no individual indication that any anonymized individual would have specific data attached to that anonymized individual.
That is my understanding of how the aggregate data definition would apply. Yes.
Okay. To go back, though, and answer the question directly, prior to this conversation, there was no plans to eliminate all of this information or destroy all the information. The thinking was that it might be kept for longer-term research purposes.
No, there was never an intention this would be kept for longer-term research purposes. These data are not research-grade data. It is impossible to write a research paper on these data in any way. The reason that we didn't specify when it was going to be destroyed is the program was launched late last spring, with the expectation that faculty of many different disciplines would engage in teaching about this subject and that some of them may want to have access to the anonymized data. And so we wanted to keep that option open if there were a legitimate reason. But I don't think the legitimacy of that reason plays well against the very important concerns about destroying the data. And I think it doesn't degrade the educational mission of the project to agree to destroy the individual data so nobody possibly can.
All right. Well, I think we're making progress on that issue, but I would respectfully point out that, what we can conclude from the aggregated data today may be very different than what we can conclude from the aggregated data with additional advances in your field 10 or 20 years hence. Certainly we're able to use DNA data today in a way that we weren't 10 or 20 years ago. So I think we have to be mindful of the fact, when we're being mindful of the privacy concerns, that the world may change over time in terms of our ability to draw new threads of information from the data that's currently available. And sort of one of the first rules of privacy is, when you're done using the information for its intended purpose, get rid of the information so that it can't be compromised over a longer period of time. I want to go to the cost issues that were referenced, and these were referenced really by CSU. Look, we all know the strain that our systems are under in terms of finance, but I don't think that can be the excuse for failing to acknowledge legitimate privacy concerns wherever and whenever they exist.
That's right.
If we can't do it without respect for the privacy rights and whatever cost that may entail, then we need to say we can't do it. My colleagues have heard me at length on this in other venues where, I've got an issue right now that's moving through the legislature on locational privacy with respect to folks who are moving through our fast track and toll systems. And of course, as soon as I raise privacy concerns, people push back and said, well, there'll be a cost to delete that information. And my view was, then that's the cost of privacy, but we can't say that since there's a cost to push the delete button, that we're simply not going to be concerned about the privacy. So I just want to say I'm mindful of legitimate cost concerns, and I understand the constraints, but that can't be the justification for failing to address bona fide privacy concerns when they come up.
I completely agree. Would you like me to explain the cost concerns that we have with respect to this project?
Well, I think they tie into the protocols, as I understood it, that are associated with the health and safety code and business and professions requirements. And if we could get a little more clarity through the chair about what it is the federal requirements provide for and require, and why you think that these additional requirements would be both unnecessary and expensive, I think that would be helpful not only to me but perhaps to the author in assessing whether or not those additional protocols are required or whether or not the commitment to work with federal protocols would be appropriate.
Yeah. if I might, just the concern about the cost board is tied to the stipulation about going to the labs, going to a certified lab. I think the concern about the duplication with federal informed consent provisions is really just adding to that burden. But really, when you get down to the nub, it's really the cost associated with having to do CLIA certified lab test work for non-clinical, non-medical, which those labs are set up to do, and apply it to any academic or research project where DNA is used. So, and Professor Ryan can speak much more, I think, adroitly to the reason why the costs go up so
Here's
significantly.
the concern. Presumably, the certified labs would have some kind of privacy protection in place, and I think the concern is that if we're just tossing our stuff into the return address envelope and sending it back to a researcher somewhere at the university, what kind of protections are in place that provide us with a real assurance that the information isn't being shared, that when information is supposed to be destroyed, how do we know it's destroyed? How do we know that the researcher who's looking at it doesn't decide he'll look at the thousands of other characteristics rather than just the 3 that have been described? How do we know those things? How do we know that the information absent these kinds of protections won't be shared or worse yet, in my view, sold to a third party for some other purpose? How do we know those things absent these kinds of protections?
Okay. I'm not sure I caught all the questions. Let me go in reverse order. With respect to could the data be sold, well, first of all, you have the integrity of the faculty of the University of California that we're not interested in doing that. You also have the fact there is no conceivable commercial value to these tests. I can speak to the cost issues per se. Because these are not common clinical tests, they have no significant medical issues associated with them, CLIA labs don't routinely do these one-off kinds of assays. So if you want a small, focused project like this one is, which has no chance of identifying an individual because the data set are so limited, then what you have to have is sort of ad hoc response of different CLIA labs to set up the assay and then the cost of doing the assay.
And let me just interrupt for a second and say, here's where I'm headed with this.
Yes.
Through the chair. You may well be able to persuade me and others that the CLIA labs is an inappropriate direction. But absent then you need to have certain protocols and assurances in place at the university. I mean no disrespect to you or your colleagues when I tell you, trust us is not really an acceptable policy standard for privacy protection. In the absence of some kind of privacy standards and protocols that are enforceable, we're left to hope that the lab assistant doesn't have a curiosity that goes beyond the bounds of what's appropriate with respect to all the other characteristics. We're left to hope that somebody doesn't say, I have a friend Bob who's doing some research back at a university on the East Coast. Maybe he'd find this information useful and share it with him, contrary to what's going on. I don't hear that there are any other assurances in place, and so I'm actually probably more sympathetic to your circumstance than you might think, but absent these kinds of protections in place, then we're left looking at what's being offered today.
Yes. So can I explain to you the process in place? So the samples are sent back to us in envelopes. The envelopes are opened by 2 career employees of the dean in the dean's office. The opened envelope is checked to see if there is a consent or assent form signed. If not, the sample is destroyed. If the assent form, consent form is signed and appropriate, they are separated at that level, and these consent forms are kept in a locked cabinet in a locked room in the dean's area. The samples are then transferred to a lab in a different building with the only identifier on those samples as being the barcode that you saw. So in that other building, in a locked room, the samples now reside in boxes with simply that label on them. And there's no chance for the people that work in that room to communicate to the people that separated the envelopes.
But again, and I don't want to belabor this point, but Madam Chair, my recollection is, I think it was the First Lady of the State of California, Ms. Shriver, who had her medical history compromised at the UCLA Med Center. Okay, part of the UC system, all the protocols in place that you would expect. Again, no disrespect to you or your colleagues. These privacy protections that we assume are there are not always serving us very well. So I'm just not to say that there couldn't be a problem if we went to a CLIA lab, but I'm just saying the sort of default to it'll be okay doesn't provide the level of assurance that I think many of us would like to see.
Certainly, we all share the same concerns. We have a 37-page detailed IRB proposal that was reviewed by our experts that have learned from the various experiences that our campus and others have had with this issue, and these are the experts that are charged with certifying whether our procedures are adequate, and they have approved this. And I believe you have a copy of our IRB.
All right. Well, Madam Chair, I don't want to take any more of your time. Here's where I am. Because we have, at this point, I think this is all we've got as of today that would provide direction. I'm still open-minded on this issue of whether the Health and Safety Code, the Business and Profession Code ought to apply, or whether or not we ought to be able to rely on federal standards. But I do feel strongly that, as I say, I think the university was tone deaf, frankly, in sort of walking down this path, and a little greater sensitivity in the future I expect will be there as a result of this conversation. I'm inclined to simply abstain today until I actually see what's in the bill, and I would hope that if the bill moves forward from the committee that you could continue to work with the author and the chair on this language about which of these procedures is or is not appropriate, because I don't think we're going to get all that finely grained information sorted through today. But I think you have some work to do in terms of, as I said, I thought it was sort of an intriguing educational exercise, but had I been, I don't know how I would have behaved when I was 18. There were a lot of things I did at 18 I wouldn't do at 57. But at this point in my life, I certainly would not have chosen to be a volunteer in the project. I do want to say, however, because I do think it's been lost, I did notice that it said not once, not twice, but 3 times voluntary in the letter that was there, including the bold type in the front of the letter, which jumped out at me when I saw it. So I do think that ought to be acknowledged. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions from committee members? Senator Emerson.
Yeah. Professor Ryan, would you explain the difference between a medical record and a barcoded study such as you're proposing here, how the difference of information can be transferred?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert on a medical record, but from a lay perspective, as my doctor has my medical records, she writes down the medical conditions that I take to her, and presumably she records what advice that she gives to me and what treatment she provides for me based upon that. A barcoded saliva sample will be converted into 3 pieces of information for 3 genes. The 3 types of information will be AA, AB, and BB for the 3 genes. There's no clinical interpretation offered of those, and there's an entire educational process in place in this program to help people recognize that this is the nature of data that they are going to have to learn how to interact with their physicians, with genetic counselors, and with their own wits to interpret during the course of their lifetime.
So as far as you know, you don't carry a barcode around that ties you to your medical records. You're known as Joe Ryan or whatever your name is with your medical records. It's not a barcode. Okay, thank you.
Other questions from committee members? Senator Wyland.
A couple of questions, then some comments. About how many entering students would there be, and would this have been sent to?
In the College of Letters and Science, there are 5,500 entering students. 500 of them approximately are international, and we did not send the samples to the international students. The numbers that we have received as of a couple hours ago was 570. We're receiving about 100 every few hours, it seems. So 350 yesterday afternoon, 460 this morning, 570 now, and we will be receiving samples, I think, till Friday.
And is this would be used, I don't know if we've talked about, is this a special class that they would take? What do you do academically?
Yeah, this is not a formal class that they register for. This is an opportunity to participate either by having one's DNA typed or not in a whole series of lectures and panels and at least 8 freshman seminars that have been organized so far that explore all aspects of personalized medicine, whose foundation is personalized genetics.
Okay, so in response, there would be some lectures they could listen to and then freshman seminars on various aspects. One may be privacy laws, and the other may deal with some of the science issues of the evolution. Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to support this legislation, and mainly it's because we're talking about freshmen. If this involved students who had been there at least a year, I wouldn't have the same problem. I just think, even with the language, when you've been admitted and you really wanted to be admitted and you're excited about it, I just think some people are going to feel like, well, I'm supposed to do this. And after they've been there a year, they're going to know their way around. I actually think they could probably get more out of those seminars. So that's the reason. It's not trying to intrude on what you do.
Sir, the bill as amended would apply to all enrolled students, so I would not be able to type the sophomores that you would prefer.
I just would exclude new students. That's my concern. And I think someone mentioned the class. You know, the reality is you're in a class, you enroll for a class, you've been in a little bit, and say, well, if you voluntarily want to give this sample, an awful lot of students are going to feel, I better do it. I mean, even if they say voluntary, I better do it. So I think that's the reality for students. I'm struck by the cost. I'm just struck by that. Here's a university that just raises fees and talks about costs all the time. In terms of science and scientific inquiry and engineering, it's an international flagship. I wouldn't have a problem with something I think, could be a course. But, I mean, I don't think you all get it. And I know others in the committee will have a different view. But from my point of view, I don't think you get it. Look at the graphics required alone. 5,000 students analyzing this stuff. I mean, I just don't think you have any concept of what we're talking about when we say cost and wise expenditure. Lastly, I'll just say, although I think I would do this if I had been at school, I think this is fascinating, and I'd want to know as much about my genes as you could show me. And I'd even try the science, although I'd struggle with it. The only other thing that I like about doing it after you've been there a year, you can make your own decisions about relevance. If I were going to offer freshman seminars, and lots of schools do, and I'm involved with an institution that does that for all incoming students, I would pick something that I thought were really relevant, that all the survey data shows graduating students don't know. The crisis the university faces right now, the major one, the crisis this state faces right now, the major one, the crisis this country faces right now, and it's international, is economic, and international economics, the economics of the state, and all the data shows students graduate and they have no clue. They just don't have any clue. All the data shows, and it's generational, it keeps getting worse, that students have increasingly less knowledge about our government, our political system, how it works, how it operates, and they vote less. They have less knowledge and they vote less. So, and then what I would also do if I were thinking about this is doing some seminars on national security and foreign policy. My gosh, these are students who are bright and we hope will become sophisticated, will become leaders, and all the survey research shows they don't know anything. I mean, here we've got billions of dollars being spent to send troops to fight and die in a foreign country on the basis of the security of our country. And they don't know anything about it. It would be one way of introducing it to them. So I don't expect you to, I love what you're doing, and you don't even need to respond to it.
Mr. Weiland, if I could, just it's interesting you say that, because each year the Berkeley campus picks a topic that they think will be of interest to students that has a societal and broad impact, and it's along the lines of the types of subjects that you've required. It just so happens this year happens to be on personalized medicine. And as such, we're having this discussion today.
Senator Weiland, could I take an opportunity to respond to a couple of your points? I share many of your concerns, and important for you to know is that the entire expense of gene typing is being paid for by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, one of the premier private philanthropic organizations, because they recognize the fundamental importance at a flagship campus to get students educated about these issues, and they're covering the entire cost.
I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased to hear that, and I think what we're doing in science and technology is we need to make sure we maintain that and help you maintain that. I'm very pleased to hear that you did that.
And if I could respond to one other thing, California is far and away the industry leader in all things genomic. We have to continue to produce the workforce that will continue to lead this. We believe that human genome sequencing, which has been estimated to complete 1 million genome sequences by 2013, will be a driver of the biotechnology of the state. And we think this is a really important program to stimulate interest of students at the very earliest level. With respect to freshmen versus sophomores, we thought deeply about that, sir, and we thought that because genetics influences not just the student, but their family, because they get their genes from their family, that it was very important for the students to have the opportunity to make the decision to participate or not while they still were probably mostly at home in the summer with their family, because this is a decision that affects everybody.
It's been said that the Howard Hughes Foundation funded it completely. What was the cost of this? Can I get a total? What is the amount?
So we asked for and received $50,000 from them, which we think is adequate to complete the project as long as we're able to complete the project on campus. The proposed amendments would require us to go to a CLIA lab, which would increase the price of the gene testing component by about 5-fold, plus whatever profit a company would need to make on top of that.
So it's $50,000 to have put this together, mailed it out, et cetera, and it may be 5 times that amount, depending upon what occurs and what answer we get, I understand, from also the Department of Public Health as to whether or not this is medical testing. And have you had that meeting, and what is the answer?
We are meeting with them at 4 o'clock this afternoon to discuss the issue of whether or not we believe there's clearly in state law an exception for academic, for non-medical, non-clinical research, which we consider this to be. DPH has indicated that they may feel as though it does get into the area of health assessments. We need to have that discussion with them. We believe that it doesn't require a CLIA lab in order to do the testing.
We'd like a response to the committee as to what you and DPH come to with
and whatever we should say, and we stated this yesterday, whatever the DPH decides, we're going to comply with. We'll abide by. If they say it has to go through a CLIA certified lab, and we'll have to make a decision as to how many samples we can take through them and what we can afford, but we'll comply with whatever the DPH ends up deciding. And I don't think that we give up any leverage. I mean, in terms of going and having that discussion with them, we've already told them, look, we want to abide by the law. We just have a difference of opinion.
And we hear that. And again, too, I mean, I don't want to go back into this.
Sure.
It's been done.
But we will get
But
back
it's sort
to
of an after the fact, and I share the concerns of many that have been raised. $50,000, even though it's from private sources, again, I would still question whether or not there are any public resources. With respect to confidentiality, let me just ask on the return envelope, it has the College of Letters and Science. There's no name. Who opens these envelopes? When it's returned to P.O. Box 16,000, who opens this?
Her name is Alex Schwartz.
I mean, but can it be an intern? Is it one person only who receives this?
It's one person. It's Alex Schwartz. She is a career employee of the University of California. She's been working in the dean's office for, I don't know how long, but a long time. And her associate, Nora Payan.
Okay. Well, we've heard the concerns. I really do question why the UC engaged in this, and I think this measure is important. Like I said, I was interested in even the penalty portion of it, and I would have gone that far as well. But let me just say for the members, whether we approve the bill or not, and I intend to vote for this bill as amended, to some extent we're already hearing the opposition from the UC. This bill simply says we are requesting from the UC, and the UC is sitting here saying we oppose this. So much for the request. CSU, which isn't even in the amended bill, is sitting here opposing the bill. So much for moving this forward. So to some extent, I mean, it really almost shows how helpless we are. Please, UC, will you please just listen to the debate about people walking through airports. And that's walking through airport screeners. And the brouhaha that has emerged with that, I think when we're dealing with especially young people coming to a university, sometimes ignorance is bliss. Be careful what you ask for. I've read this consent form, and I think it's very unclear. I mean, their language is here, it's nice, but there are so many more implications to this. And what happens to that student who finds, depending what happens, particular information and on their path in life, you know, at a time when we are warning young people, be careful what you put on Facebook.
Okay, I've got it.
And now we're saying, okay, do this, and some little 18-year-old says, oh, golly gee, I got this back, and guess what? I mean, this is DNA. I believe in research. I earned my PhD at the UC. I believe in research. I also know that students are a captive audience. And there are questions about the ethics of using captive audiences to give their consent when you probably know, Professor Ryan, as well, there is a whole debate about how informed is informed consent, especially when you're dealing with a captive audience coming to a university. But those are questions beyond the scope of this committee. So I intend to move it forward. I just really urge the UC and the CSU to think about what we ask of our incoming students. They're not guinea pigs, and there is an appropriate place and time for this, but I do not believe that it is upon time of being admitted to the university to say, come one, come all, and bring your genes and your DNA with you. So having said that, I'll support the bill. Any other comments, or if there's a motion on the measure? Senator Hancock.
Thank you. Yeah, in just looking at the write-up about the author's amendments, it is only related to UC now, and it's only a request. Is that correct?
Correct. That's all we can do with UC.
Okay. And then in looking at it, I have to say the discussion about the scientific laboratory and who was going to look at the genetic samples, I don't actually see coming up here anywhere in a way that I understand. So my inclination at this point is very similar to Senator Simitian's. I think the message has been sent about the concern for privacy and for protecting privacy rights as we get into this whole new area of DNA testing and other things. Nonetheless, I have to say that this strikes me as relevant learning, hands-on learning, just the kind of thing you and I support frequently, Senator Weiland. And I would not be able to vote for something like this without much more discussion, probably a referral to the Health Committee and Judiciary Committee. But this is a voluntary, anonymous program that's educational, and it seems to me that this bill is an overreach on that at this particular time.
Can I respond to that?
Senator, who wanted to respond? Senator Simitian? I heard somebody say they wanted to respond.
I do have an additional comment I'd like to make.
Okay, let's go to comments from the committee, and then we'll allow the author to close on the bill. Senator Simitian.
Just one last comment. And we've been down this path before with both UC and the CSU system, and it's not a terribly productive exchange. Here's what happens in my judgment. You lead with your chin, then you're surprised that someone pops you in the chin, then you call out all of your allies to come and man the battle stations, and we end up in what is largely an adversarial conversation. You know, in future, my advice to you, unsolicited, but here it is, you know, when you get yourself in a tangle like this, take a big step back and ask yourself, how might we have done this better? And let's lead with that acknowledgement, and we're less likely to be in the kind of conversation we're having today. I just feel this is my 10th year in the legislature. I know others have been here even longer. There have been a host of issues from both UC and CSU that have us in these kinds of sort of knocking heads conversations. It's just not very productive. And what happens, as you heard, is that some members, when you sort of, you know, man the battle stations take that as a reluctance or an unwillingness to acknowledge that something might have been better. And I just hope that whether it's this issue or others in the future, people will take a slightly different approach and step up and say, you know what, benefit of hindsight, we might have done that better, could have thought it through more clearly, didn't think about those particular aspects, want to work with you to figure out how to, rather than to sort of say, we are the UC system, we are the CSU system. I respect the system immensely, but even the best of systems, just like the best of people, don't always get it right. So that's my homily for the day. Thank you.
Senator Huff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to comment. We've had a pretty rigorous discussion of the issues here, and out of deference to my colleague, I just want to say I'm not supporting the bill today for a couple of reasons. First, it's a recommendation, and they've already said they don't really want to do this, mostly because it's going to jack up the costs significantly to where they don't have the funding for it, and I think it's important. I believe the value has been in vetting this and understanding some of our concerns, and I think some of the comments that Senator Simitian just made are spot on. Hopefully our ears are on and we're all listening here. Swab, yeah, there you go. So I don't want to spit on this bill, but I can't support it, and I just want to let you know. Thanks.
You may want to use this. Okay, any other comments? All right, having said this, let's allow you to close, and then sergeants, if we can have members return, because then we'll be ready to finalize and lift calls.
Every person, unless they're an identical twin, has completely different DNA, which defines them in many ways. It defines their physical characteristics. It defines partly what is likely to happen to them throughout much of their lives. This is profoundly private information, and it must be treated with respect, with confidentiality and privacy. I think the issues raised with the Bring Your Genes to Cal program have called upon the legislature to provide, at least request, reasonable safeguards in the future. This is all AB 70 does. It's not a gotcha. It's not an attempt to establish some kind of FPPC over DNA information from the UCs or Cal States. It's an attempt to be a partner and assuage public concern, and I ask for your support.
Thank you. Secretary, call the roll.
Is there a motion?
Oh, is there a motion as proposed to be amended? Moved by Senator Weiland.
Rivera?
Aye.
Romero, aye. Huff?
No.
Huff, no. Alquist? Emerson? No. Emerson, no. Hancock? No. Hancock, no. Lou? No. Lou, no. Price? Simitian? No. Simitian, no. Weiland? Aye. Weiland, aye.
Okay, the bill is on call, and we'll wait for the other members of the committee to come back so they can vote.
Thank you.
Okay.
There's not enough votes for the bill, not just one, because then it'll be 4.
Sergeants, have we heard from the other members? Okay, Senator Alquist has returned to the committee. Let's go ahead and call the roll on. Okay, let's go ahead and call the. Go ahead. Okay, first one is AB 184 block. Senator Alquist.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that measure's already out, but okay, and we have your vote recorded. AB 70. This is as proposed to be amended in appropriations.
And how did the chair vote?
I voted aye. It does not have sufficient votes, but the chair did vote aye.
Aye.
Okay, Alquist aye. And it's still on call. Thank you. How's it going in Riven Tax?
It'll be another couple hours, I would think.
Hang in there. Thank you. Any word from Senator? Can we find out if Senator Price is coming to the committee? If not, we're going to adjourn.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Oh, he's in a meeting, so that's it? Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and announce the final votes then. On AB 70, it is 3 to 5. The measure fails. Okay, the committee is now concluded.